Hello beautiful people, how are y'all feeling today? I hope you guys are feeling phenomenal. Today we're going to be talking about the full moon in Gemini lunar eclipse. So for those of us who are very ready for transformation, for change, for releasing the things that are no longer serving us, get ready guys. This moon is fully supportive of us. So the theme for most full moons and eclipses alike are embracing transformational change, right? And gaining clarity on the things that are not working for us anymore and what direction we are now moving towards. When we incorporate Gemini into the picture, the message is to look at the everyday details that are surrounding us. When we think of change, we often think of like those giant drastic leaps, right? That are gonna propel us into the person that we wanna be. And that's great. That's wonderful too. However, the learning of Gemini is very much making tiny little baby steps and creating change on an incremental level by paying attention to the details of our everyday life. It is the accumulation of the small everyday decisions that we make that contribute to our growth, that contribute to the theme of change and evolution in our lives, right? So an example of this is that you know that maybe social media or consumption of the media in general is really impacting your mental, emotional health. So our drastic leap of change could very much be, well, I'm going to move to a different country entirely where social media is not yet a thing and totally disconnect from all of these problems, and that will be my transformation. Could that work? Yes, very possibly it could. And we can also make those incremental little everyday changes, right? So maybe taking a one-day hiatus from social media, just taking a simple step back and reflecting on how we feel after that small change. And then over time, building up a ritual or a pattern of some kind. We are really being called right now to take a look at the details that are in front of us. So for so many of us, this is going to be examining the habits, the patterns, the daily practices and rituals that we may or may not have established in our lives. Are these things serving us? Are they for the benefit of our evolution, of our transformation, of breaking free into the person that we want to be? Eclipses are also an amazing point of recalibration and learning to develop peace and be okay with everything that's come so far. So eclipse season is now starting again, and we are really being called to reflect on what's happened so far this year in 2020. What have the learnings been? How are we feeling emotionally? How are we feeling mentally throughout this entire process? How have we grown this year? What have we learned? And how can we hold ourselves accountable by letting go of what belongs in the past? So there are a few important astrological transits that are happening right now, and I just want to touch very briefly on a couple of them. The first being the full moon eclipse in Gemini in opposition to the sun in Sagittarius. So when we are exploring the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, we are very much looking at the details of our lives, right? The details in our lives that are readily apparent to us, you know, being that Gemini axis point. And then we are comparing that with the Sagittarius axis point of freedom and expansion. So kind of adopting this Hawkeye's view of our life and seeing the objective, greater picture. When we combine these two, applying the transformational potential in taking a look at the details and also embracing the overall larger perspective of what's happening in our collective lives, we can gain so much more clarity on the direction we want to pursue. Some discomfort is going to arise during this process. I want to challenge us all to sit with that discomfort there is a very human predisposition to run from perceived pain, right? And try to escape that pain and move in the direction of our pleasure. However, growth does not come from a place that feels comfortable to us. Growth happens when you're in the trenches, digging through that discomfort and really understanding what that is bringing to your attention. And as we discussed during the energy reading for this week, we are also very much exploring the opposition between Uranus in Taurus and Venus in Scorpio. So anytime Uranus is involved in a particular transit, Uranus being kind of the rebel of the planets here, we want to bring about change and transformation and kind of uproot the way that we've been doing things thus far. And when Venus joins in the conversation, we are really looking at relationships, our relationship to the self, self-love, relationship to others. We are really being asked how we want to move differently in these areas of our lives right now. How do we want to show up for those we love? What feels nourishing for us and fulfilling for us personally? Maybe this looks a little different than it did for you last year. Maybe you're really looking at the societal picture of what love means and finding for yourself that this is not what feels supportive and nourishing for you anymore. And that's okay. Anytime Venus is in Scorpio, we're really being invited to delve below the surface, right? And kind of dive beneath what is known. Scorpio is not a surface level sign, okay? It's all about exploring deeply and diving into the mystery of it all. So rather than focusing on the superficial, we are really taking it one step further and looking at what actually is it that makes us feel loved. And when we tie this back into the full moon eclipse in Gemini, we are really being called to ask what small daily decisions we can make in order to create the transformation that we desire in our relationships, in our relationship to self and to other. How can we create these changes that we desire in a small, incremental, daily way? And the last transit that we're going to touch on today is 2 days prior to the full moon eclipse in Gemini. We have Neptune going direct in Pisces. So anytime a planet has been in retrograde and then is going stationary, ready to move direct again, we're going to be feeling the energy of this transit a lot more potently. On the highest vibrational universal level for Neptune, the learning is to recognize that we are all divine, that we are all connected to Source, that we are all one. Now, how this manifests on the 3D level can get a little bit murky, especially with our 3D reality being a little bit tense and super frictiony right now. We may be discovering that there is some fogginess around this right now, and that's okay too. So let's all be mindful of the frustration and agitation that can come from this seeming lack of clarity and confusion that kind of creates like this distortion over what's real and what's not. The more centered we are, the more grounded we are, the more we are able to tune into that higher learning of the Neptunian energy. Whoa, all right guys, so the first card to come out today was Death. So when we talk about those incremental changes, we are very much being asked to look at what our relationship to the everyday is. So maybe it's your eating patterns that could use some revolution and shift, right? Maybe you're not making the best dietary choices for your wellness. Or maybe it's your engagement with social media. Ooh, somebody had something to say about that one. All right, so we have the Ace of Swords and the Emperor wanted to come out as well. So in relation to social media, Gemini very much governs that as well. So we are really being called to examine if we're making the best choices for our own well-being. Because well-being goes so much deeper than just the physical, right? We are very much being called to closely examine our mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness as well. Ooh, Eight of Cups, okay. The Eight of Cups has been popping up a lot lately, and we're going to get to why in just a moment here. So as we talk more about these everyday details, we're really being asked to take these little steps in our journey rather than looking to do like a complete 180 switch around. And some of this conversation with ourselves is going to feel very... All right, here we go. Just about what I was saying. Two of Swords is going to feel very conflicting and cause us to feel a little bit of discomfort, as we mentioned earlier. And this discomfort often stems from a place of seeing the gap between the actuality of where we are and what happens after the chrysalis phase of metamorphosis, right? We're kind of being broken down into the goop right now. Like when a caterpillar is becoming a butterfly, we don't see everything that goes on inside the shell during that chrysalis period. And what's happening is that the caterpillar and all that it once was is getting broken down and eaten by all these enzymes essentially until it's just this giant goopy blobby mess, right? And then it rebuilds itself from all the mess, from the decay of the old into the newly transformed butterfly. And our own growth processes are very much like this. So the phase of learning to kind of crumble into our bits is very, very uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable space is where a choice point lies. We can choose to either run from the discomfort and kind of cling to the comfortability of what we've always known, or we can meet that discomfort head on and envelop it and embrace the discomfort. And when we really sit with that discomfort and hold it as our own, we can begin to make choices and changes towards what we are actually desiring to create from our lives. All right, guys, let's get right into this reading. It is yet another impactful one. So the first card that we had come out today is Death. So this is the card that is associated with the sign of Scorpio. We are very much still exploring that death rebirth axis, especially with, as we talked about, Venus being in Scorpio, opposing Uranus, who is in Taurus. So we are looking at the breakdown of the old. Now, as I say always with the Death card, don't be scared, guys. Everything's gonna be just fine. So death in this sense is not a literal death, but a metaphorical death. And this is also very representative of the learning of eclipse season, right? Shedding layers and learning to let go of the things that we no longer desire in our lives, as well as the past versions of us. You know, and that's not to say that we don't honor those things and recognize that they did once serve us. So we can do that and also recognize with love from a place of kindness and compassion that we need to allow these things to kind of melt away and become part of our past if we want to birth ourselves into this new way of being. And from this space, from this birth into this new way of being, we have the Ace of Swords. So when I saw this card, I received a very strong message that this is a new beginning in being able to very clearly and articulately speak your truth. Articulately? Apparently I just can't say this word today. Articulately. Okay, you know what I'm trying to say. So apparently some of us are gonna have a little bit more of a challenge than others with speaking articulately. And in terms of creating boundaries, in terms of speaking our truth and being a very authentic, vulnerable, raw, and ruthless version of ourselves, we are really going to be adopting that approach to how we want to show up in relation to others, right? This narrative that social media has kind of perpetuated for us that, you know, we only have to show our best face to the world and wear this kind of porcelain mask that is filled with perfection and flowers and lavender and all these beautiful floaty things, that is no longer serving us as a collective. Our new collective way of approaching others and connecting with both self and other is through the path of authenticity, of vulnerability and transparency. And this starts first on a very individual and personal level. So really getting clear with ourselves about what boundaries we want to create, about what makes us feel seen, what makes us feel heard and understood and nourished and fulfilled. We do the internal work first and foremost, and then we can begin to bring that into the context of other relationships. The next card we have today is the Emperor, and this guy is very much the master of the self, right? Being associated with the sign of Aries, the Emperor is an autonomous and sovereign being. Sovereignty, right? That what a powerful concept that is. The Emperor leads from a self-centered and heart-centered space. So when we use self-centered in this context, it's not this demonized version of self-centeredness that we have experienced, right? Self-centered means that you are your own center, and every decision you make comes out of love for the self, and because you love yourself, that love extends to encompass the love of all. So when the Emperor leads, he is very much leading from that space of self and self-love, moving in a way in which he can show up fully with all his many gifts. And this is the kind of energy that is going to help us to create those new beginnings in relationships, whatever they may look like. It is from that self-centered and aligned space that we can begin to fully express everything that we want to express to the world and share with the world. And this begins by starting down a new path. With the Eight of Cups, we are very much turning away from these old cups, these old ways of doing things, these old ways of being and moving through the world. And we are embarking on this new journey. We're embracing a new way of doing things. And again, these cups that this guy is walking away from doesn't have to be like a drastic change that you're making. These cups are small, little, everyday things that you do. Going back to the social media theme, how often are we scrolling? For how long are we scrolling? How is this inhibiting or supporting what we're trying to do, right? How are we finding worth and value through our engagement through this device, through this tool? The Eight of Cups journey is very much about turning away from what's been known and what feels familiar to us in order to venture out into the unknown, to explore that. And with this journey comes a little bit of internal conflict, as the Two of Swords represents here. We are kind of at this crossroads point within ourselves, and we feel a little bit on the defensive with this. And that defensiveness is a natural self-protective mechanism that comes from really looking at our own selves, our own patternings, and calling ourselves out. And it's not easy to hold ourselves accountable for these changes that we want to make, right? Sometimes it feels really icky inside and it doesn't necessarily feel good. These transformational shifts are not easy, and they can sometimes come with a little bit of internal friction. So when we come to that point where we're feeling defensive, we're feeling kind of uneasy, and we maybe don't want to fully look at the way our lives are right now and how we have contributed to these things, take a step back from it all. It's okay. All these things are still going to be here when you return. The energy for this reading is so powerful and so potent, and the transits going on right now can feel a little bit overwhelming. So please, please be gentle with yourselves, guys. And to close out this reading, I am going to draw one final card from my Moonology Oracle deck. I'm so proud of us, you guys. We are really coming into our own here, and this has not been an easy time for anybody. We are really learning to take back our power, to really embrace our sovereignty, and to learn some really challenging lessons as a collective right now. So give yourself some props, guys. We have already come so far this year, and the journey is far from over. So remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and the deconstruction of the old is going to take some time, right? It's kind of like the decay and the decomposition that happens in nature, right? It's a slow process, and the rebuilding and the rebirthing is going to come through all of this. All right, and the card for today is, wow, full moon in Sagittarius. Look at the bigger picture. This I find very interesting, given that the full moon in Gemini is playing with the sun in Sagittarius, that axis that we talked about earlier on today. So along with looking at all the details of our everyday lives, you know, when we start to kind of feel bogged down in the details, it is so helpful to kind of take that bird's eye view that we were talking about before and looking at the overall larger scheme, the bigger picture. The learning of the full moon in Sagittarius card is very much about adopting that universal source perspective and remembering the freedom that you are creating for yourself. Sometimes when we get bogged down in the details and of all the little changes that we need to make, it is so helpful to tune back in and remember the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is it that we are seeking to create? Whether it's freedom through financial freedom, freedom through creative freedom, whatever that looks like for you, this is where we want to bring our focus back to. So along with releasing all the things that are holding us back and that were maybe serving us in the past, we are also being called to step into this divine lens and this inspiration to be birthed into this new version of ourselves, this new collective vision for humanity. It is really up to us to define what this vision for humanity, for the self, what that means for us on an individual level, and then to explore that concept together as a whole. Where do we see ourselves going through the end of this year, through 2021 and into the foreseeable future? What path do we want to create for humanity? Do we want to continue on this trajectory of ruin and destruction and disease? Or do we want to be birthed into this new consciousness, this rising of the feminine, this healing of the masculine, and really embracing the oneness of it all? The healing and the growth, yes, that very much happens on an individual level first. And here's the thing with and consciousness, right? We heal individually and we heal collectively as a whole. We are individual and we are one. Part of the learning from this reading I'm finding is very much taking the dual polarities, right? The Gemini Sagittarius axis, the details versus the bigger picture, and melding them into one and really holding both as true. One of the huge themes for 2020 has been really embracing that and consciousness. And do this within yourselves as well. Embrace the dark and the light. Hold space for the shadow and your gifts. Really integrate all these different aspects of yourselves. The parts that you absolutely love and adore, and maybe the parts that you are struggling a little bit to accept. It's all a process of the journey, guys, and I am so proud of all of us and for all we've been through this year and all the amazing, wonderful growth that's come from it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this video served you well. If it did and you would like to dive a little bit deeper, I am offering my full moon special 20% off tarot readings from November 28th until December 3rd. So hit me up, grab this offer while it's hot. And I'm also still offering pay what you can coaching sessions through the end of 2020. So if you're looking to gain some more clarity and insight about your own healing and growth journey, I would love to work with you. Thank you and have a beautiful rest of your week.